whenever that day comes on the calendar, numbness is actually the first word that kind of comes into my head. Maybe it's just because I've had 20 years to think about it, but I just kind of, it's February 2nd. I do remember the shooting. I do remember it's a special in the terms that it's not ordinary like every other day.
Hundreds, maybe thousands of people's lives were changed that day, and my life certainly was. And I'm glad I was there. I'm glad I was able to do what I did. I wish nobody would ever have to do that again.
According to law enforcement agencies, an active shooter event is any situation where one or more individuals actively engage in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined and populated area. Active shooter events can happen in any setting, at any time, and law enforcement statistics show that they are on the rise. Too many lives have been lost in active shooter events. Often, the shooter has studied the location and has made plans to maximize the loss of life. A shooter can be male or female, of any age, and from any ethnic background. While it is not feasible to prevent all active shooter events, you can maximize your chances of survival by training yourself to take actions that can help save your life. When humans encounter situations that involve extreme stress or violence, the reaction we experience is controlled by an area of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala's response to stress is sometimes described as a remnant of our caveman brain, which takes over your thinking brain in order to help you survive situations that involve extreme stress or violence. When this happens, your response becomes physiological and not rational. Your survival instinct may be to freeze, flee, or fight. However, this may not be the best response given the situation. Freeze, flee, fight. These three impulses control your physical response during threats of extreme physical violence. Select each image to learn more. When threatened with extreme physical violence, your first impulse is to freeze in place. Freezing is part of your natural defense system. When you freeze, you are less likely to be detected by a predator that you have spotted in the distance. And if the predator is nearby, freezing may help postpone an attack that could be triggered by movement. After you break through the freeze phase, your next impulse may be to flee. Evacuating from a location when exposed to extreme physical violence is also a primal response hardwired in our brains. Our bodies experience a temporary surge of hormones like adrenaline, which may boost speed in anticipation of fleeing or moving away from a threat. Depending on the circumstances, fighting back may be the only option for survival. Your body prepares you for this impulse by giving you a temporary boost in strength. For most people, fighting for survival is the response of last resort.
Fear can paralyze you, or it can make you take action. And so I laid there for a little while, and he told me, you need to stand up, Mr. Lane. And I said, I can't, I'm too afraid. And of course I was. And his comment was, if you don't stand up, I'm going to start shooting kids. I knew it was something I had to do. You know how powerful the mind is I knew when I was going to stand up, he was going to shoot me. I could feel my chest. But I did, I stood up. It wasn't his scenario, it wasn't his script, if you will, and so he was playing it by ear as much as I was, and I didn't present a threat to him. And I'm sure because I said I was afraid, I'm sure he thought I'm still in control of the situation. He took up a position kind of in a corner where he knew he would be kind of secure, if you will. Mr. Kairos, who was the vice principal, came down, and it was his wife's class. And he asked if she was okay, and I said, no, I think she's dead. And he left, never came in the classroom, of course, but went back to take care of business like school administrators do. They take care of the business.
Mrs. Smith said to the class that something terrible's happened and that we were to remain in the classroom and wait for further instructions. The way she said it wasn't like a teacher anymore. It was like, mom. It was in a different level of authority. It was, this is in your best interest to stay in this classroom where you're protected.
Places where large numbers of people gather, such as campuses, shopping malls, military bases, office buildings, places of worship, and industrial facilities, are places that have been targeted by active shooters. When you're in these types of places, it's important to familiarize yourself with your surroundings. Doing so enables you to develop a sense of place and a plan, or situational awareness, which is an important part of emergency preparedness. Select each image to learn more. Make it a habit to always look for 2 exits from any work location or other place where people gather. Sometimes exit doors lead you to places you are not familiar with, especially those from public places such as malls, office buildings, or movie theaters. If this happens, look for signs indicating a path to the outside and to safety, or an exit route. Exit routes may pass through 1 or more doors to get outside a building, or they may involve stairs. If possible, become familiar with these exit routes. Check for locked or blocked exits, especially at work. Blocked exits are a safety hazard and must be corrected. Exit doors cannot be locked from the inside. If you find this hazard, correct it yourself or work with the people who operate the facility to do so. Just as you should take stock of available exits at a gathering place, you should also be on the lookout for potential spots that can provide you shelter and place you out of a shooter's view. A place to shelter is basically any object or structure large enough to place a barrier between you and the threat. As you go about your day, whether at work or in other settings where people gather, take note of anything that appears, behaves, or sounds suspicious. Select each object to learn more. Objects that appear out of place or unattended could simply be objects dropped, misplaced, or forgotten, so it's important to consider the context. When in doubt, always err on the side of caution and report objects that are out of place enough to catch your attention. If you see someone in an area they shouldn't be in, report what you see to those who can help deal with the situation. You should inform your manager or supervisor of any potential for workplace violence due to direct knowledge, reasonable suspicion, observable warning signs, or direct threat. Those involved in past active shooter events heard sounds they couldn't identify that actually turned out to be sounds of gunfire. Don't ignore foreign sounds. The sooner you become aware of a threat, the sooner you are able to respond. Call 911, as taking this action can reduce emergency response time. We've learned to disregard sounds in our everyday lives that sound similar to gunfire, and we've become accustomed to unrealistic gunfire sounds in films and TV shows. Select the objects to hear examples of gunfire and other sounds you may hear that sound similar to gunfire. You may want to turn your speaker volume down for these examples.
Natalie was in obvious pain, and I knew that Natalie needed some help, and so we somehow negotiated and were able to get her out of the room. And I remember very vividly going back and trying to help her, lift her up, and she'd been shot through the chest and the arm. And lifting her up behind, and the arm is like there was no bone. But we were able to get her out, and then as soon as she was out of the classroom, I went back in. And then the second one was Emily, and I knew she was a diabetic, and she was kind of real chalky white. And then finally it was Arnie, but he had an open sucking chest wound and had lost a lot of blood. Don't know that I ever thought about not returning, but I knew I was the adult, and I knew I had to be in the classroom and take care of the situation.
Since it may not be possible to move away from the shooter, hide as quickly as possible. Select each object to learn actions to take when choosing to hide. Here are some actions to take when hiding during an active shooter event. Turn off the lights, lock the door, and close the blinds. Get low to the ground and completely out of sight. Make sure that you cannot be seen through any windows. Stay quiet. Keep those around you quiet, and place your cell phone on silent, non-vibration mode. Many organizations conduct drills for lockdown procedures to prepare for active shooter events. You should know your organizational lockdown policies and procedures and follow them. You should also practice the personal actions you would take during a lockdown, even if others do not. An active shooter wants to move fast, so when hiding, make it as difficult as possible for the shooter to find you by getting behind as many locked doors as possible and making entrance to your space as difficult as possible by moving furniture and other items against doors and corridors. Ignore fire alarms during an active shooter incident. The shooter may attempt to draw people out of hiding by setting off an alarm. Watch closely for fire and smoke, as these can also be used as weapons against you. Another hardwired response that follows the freeze phase is to run or flee from the threat of extreme physical violence. Select each image to learn what to do when running from an active shooter. If you hear what you think is gunfire, leave the location you are in as fast as possible, but only when it is safe to do so. Leave your personal items behind. If you are near the gunfire, stay low and continue moving. Make yourself a smaller moving target and try to get as much distance as possible between you and the threat. Move toward an exit path. Avoid panicking and focus on your goal. When running from an active shooter, if the shooter makes demands of you, never comply. Get away from the area as soon as it is safe to do so. You have a constitutional right to defend yourself and others from harm. If you cannot run or hide from an active shooter, defend yourself as a last resort. Throw things, tackle, or strike your attacker with any available items. Do whatever must be done, and match force with force to interrupt the shooter's mission. Laws vary for concealed weapons permit holders, but your constitutional right to defend yourself in an active shooter event is unchanged by that status. If you are a concealed weapons permit holder, the choice is yours on how you want to defend your life. Only call 911 if you can safely do so. If you are the person calling 911, use time wisely to shorten emergency response time. This is not the time to tell a story. Be brief and allow the 911 dispatcher to do their job. The operator will prompt you with more questions if needed. Select each button for important steps to consider when calling 911. State your location. Provide the address, including the exact location within the building or area where the shooting is taking place. The 911 dispatcher will have specific questions regarding location. Focus on answering these questions and be brief. Remember, the sooner you respond, the sooner help is on the way. Confirm that a shooting is taking place. The 911 dispatcher is trained to prompt you with questions regarding the emergency. Be brief and specific when providing the details of the active shooter event. Give the location of the shooter. You may have already exited the building to safety, or you may be located in a different part of the building from where the shooting is taking place. Provide as much information as possible to help first responders pinpoint the assailant within the building or structure. Describe the shooter, including the type of weapon they are using, the number of victims, and any other information that will help law enforcement. Be as specific as you can. This helps the 911 dispatcher assess the gravity of the situation and get the appropriate responders on the scene as soon as possible. Select and drag each situation to the most appropriate action to take during an active shooter event. If the situation is placed correctly, it will remain in place. If it is placed incorrectly, it will return to the top of the page where you can try again.
We started seeing police cars just coming onto the front lawn of Frontier Junior High. Cops started careening into the school, and now we're really confused. We have no idea what's happening.
Being a wrestler, it was always take what you get, not what you want. And I knew that at some point, if there was an opportunity, I was going to, do something. I don't know what, but he said he was going to put the gun in my mouth and take me hostage, and he had me close, and he had the rifle, and I knew it was my opportunity, so I kind of charged him and pinned him against the wall. Kids immediately got up. Police were right outside the door.
It was after a short amount of time that I saw police officers escorting the shooter out of the school. He was very calm, head down, handcuffed, and it was at this time that now Mrs. Smith gets another phone call, and she hangs up and she says, okay, we're going to be exiting the classroom, and we're going to be taking the left staircases. I get down the stairs, and pretty much right in front of the staircase was EMTs, police officers, and a body laying in a pool of blood.
When law enforcement arrives on the scene of an active shooter event, you will likely see an aggressive, intense, and fast-moving response. Law enforcement has one mission in these situations: to end the violence. You should expect the response team to be dressed in uniforms and protective gear, making them appear intimidating, and they will be clearly identified with badges or labeling on their clothing, such as police or SWAT. You should always expect to see law enforcement officers armed and with their weapons drawn, ready to confront the threat. Select each image to learn what to do and not to do when law enforcement arrives on the scene of an active shooter event. Show the law enforcement team that you are not their target by getting out of their way and moving the opposite direction from where they are moving, dropping anything you have in your hands, dropping to the ground, covering your head and staying quiet and letting them move over you, following any orders they give you, and answering any questions they ask you quickly and factually. If you don't know, quickly say so to keep them moving. Law enforcement will have their eyes fixed on any person with a weapon. If you are a concealed weapons permit holder, you must disarm prior to the arrival of law enforcement, or when you deem it is safe to do so you are not viewed as the perpetrator. Do not disturb or interfere with law enforcement, as their first priority is to identify and neutralize the shooter. For example, don't point, scream, talk to them or try to help. Don't touch or grab them, and don't ask them for medical help or ask them to help anyone else.
I needed to enter the gymnasium, which is where they were congregating all of the students as we were waiting for the buses. We get in there and we start to see some of our classmates come into the gymnasium that had been in that classroom where the school shooting had taken place. Some were covered in blood, some were speechless, some were crying, and so we heard that the student had entered the classroom. He had shot Manuel Vela, Arnie Fritz, Natalie Hintz, and also killed Mrs. Leona Kairos, which was my math teacher.
Law enforcement has arrived at the scene of the active shooter emergency. You should do which of the following. Select all that apply. When law enforcement arrives on the scene, you should drop anything you have in your hands, remain quiet, let them move over you, and follow any orders they give you.
My first class would be in the room that the school shooting had taken place. I remember walking up to the classroom, kind of walking by and looking in, and I walked to my locker, went to open it. I think my intent was to prolong the period so I didn't have to enter the classroom right away. Up behind me walks John Lane. Mr. Lane was actually instrumental in getting me back in that classroom, and it was actually the first time I cried. I thanked him for doing what he did because it was very selfless. I mean, he's a husband, a father. So he was the one that gave me the courage to, go in the classroom.
I think I had the right things to help me to survive, to deal with it. But I know that's not the case for everyone. When you are suffering, it's a sign of strength to go get help. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a very complex problem. How do you stop it? How do you prevent it? And I'm not sure in this day and age that you can.
But I believe that with training, that the loss of life is going to dwindle because more and more people are going to say no, and they're going to help put a stop to this. We're not looking for somebody to become Rambo in order to defend everyone and disarm an active shooter should someone come into the environment. But essentially just training yourself on what to do and what not to do.
Practice it, because you're going to make better decisions. If you practice what you're going to do in a stressful situation, it's more likely you're going to make a better decision.
And in this day and age, I think that's training everybody should have.
There is more you can do to both prepare yourself for active shooter events and try to prevent them from happening in the first place. If you know someone struggling with mental health issues, try and connect them with resources that can help them. Ask your employer, place of worship, and other places you regularly gather with people if they have an emergency response plan and if it covers active shooter scenarios. Finally, practice situational awareness by knowing your surroundings, identifying exit routes, and planning to survive in emergency scenarios.